Welcome everybody to a new episode with Astrid, your APD, your dietitian with T, no C. I'm going to be joined today by Menno Henselmans, and we're going to be having a really great conversation about so many topics. I've got a couple of questions for general questions that we've got, true and false, overrated, underrated, and fill in the blank. Let's see what Menno answers. So let me get him on and we will be ready to get started. How are you, my friend?
Okay, good. Can you hear me well?
I know that you have built a sort of like a reputation for calling out BS on everything that we talk about fitness. But why is one myth that refuses to die, no matter how much data we have on?
I think in general, for mainstream opinion to change, it's very difficult if the myth involves more than step one thinking. For example, my last post on protein not being inherently more satiating than carbs is just too difficult for many people to grasp because they cannot grasp, for one, the difference between macronutrients and foods. So people automatically assume a protein, oh, chicken breast, and chicken breast is more satiating than, and then they think carbs is bagel. Chicken breast is more satiating than bagel, therefore protein is more satiating than carbs. But protein can also mean a whey shake, and carbs can also mean broccoli. So you have to basically disentangle that. And then you also have to factor in what inherently means. So there's a difference between protein. When you're already consuming enough protein, at that point, we don't see an effect of protein specifically anymore on satiety. But before that, we do. So there's like two levels of nuance to it. And those myths are very, very, very difficult to dispel. People basically need a one-step solution. So for example, with nutrient timing, history very often that the pendulum basically swings in just a complete opposite direction. So before it was after the gym, you have to slam down a whey shake right then and there, probably also before the workout and maybe also during the workout. And then there were some studies casting doubt on that idea. And then the pendulum just shifted to nutrient timing does not matter, like completely, in any circumstance, not restricted to pre and post workout feeding, not restricted to protein, just flat out nutrient timing doesn't matter. So that's usually how it goes, because that's a simple wisdom or nugget, if you will, that you can get. But when there are levels of nuance to it, those myths are very, very hard to dispel.
Yeah, and especially when we think about the nuance on each of these topics and how it differs depending on the individual when we kind of narrow down, okay, what's the actual situation of that particular individual in context to that topic or this specific statement. When we think about protein being not being superior or inherently more satiating than carbs. Yes, provided that you already have enough protein, then if you already have a really good baseline and good intake of protein, then maybe having more is not going to make any additional benefit. Now, when we think about having enough protein or a good adequate amount of protein, what would you consider would be like the minimum requirement or like the minimum non-negotiable? I would say, in my opinion, it would be at least 1 gram per kilogram of ideal body weight. If we're talking about someone with a decent standard body fat percentage, but if we were thinking about someone who has a very high BMI or very overweight, then we've used that ideal body weight. But what would you be? What would you say in that case?
Or someone engages in exercise, especially strength training, would go higher. I would go as high as 1.6 being the absolute minimum. I see almost no circumstances where I would recommend somebody consume less than that. So 1.6 gram per kilogram of total body weight of protein per day, total protein intake, including all sources, but assuming at least 50% of those are high quality. It's really the minimum I would recommend in almost any context. And if someone does not engage in strength training, well, first and foremost, you should. But if they don't, then I would say you want to go with 1.2 gram per kilogram. That seems to be like the consensus for satiety and health, because the benefits are substantial and there are essentially no downsides. It's not that difficult, especially for women, to get these intakes. You mentioned overweight individuals. When someone is especially obese, I like to use the recommendations from Eric Helms that kind of convert a gram per fat-free mass to gram per total body weight. And something like 2.3 grams per or 2.1 gram per kilogram fat-free mass is probably a good guideline. Can probably go a little bit below that, but again, not too much.
I like that approach. And I think it's something that probably is just hard to grasp is the conception of eating enough protein. Sometimes a lot of women, I think that's where the population that struggles the most to get enough. And even when you use 1 gram per pound of body weight, or 1.2 to 1.5, that is still hard for them to get to that point. So I think when we're looking at this scenario and then we think about the statement that you mentioned about the protein not being more satiating than carbs, when we actually look in this situation, probably they still need to get to the adequate amount of protein before we can actually say, well, this is not going to be really applicable to you.
Yeah, protein is like one of the basics. You know, energy intake and protein, nutrition wise, are really pillars that you first want to get right. At least get like a good baseline of those, get those under control, and then we can talk about nutrient timing, more nuanced things.
Now, let me ask you something. Where do you stand now on fasted cardio, metabolic adaptation, and refeed days? Are they necessary tools or just outdated distractions?
So let's take them one at a time. Fasted cardio is mostly nonsense. I think pretty much all research from the beginning until now has shown that you get the same fat loss because it comes down to energy balance. So there's actually a risk that you have a little bit less fat loss when you do fasted cardio if it's intensive cardio, because your performance might suffer, so your energy expenditure might be lower, and you end up in less of an energy deficit. Most circumstances, though, research finds that it's just a trivial difference. The key misunderstanding is that people think the fat substrate use equates fat loss. So people often equate burning fat, as in oxidizing fatty acids, with losing adipose tissue. And those can be very different things. So what you oxidize in the moment, what your body uses as fuel at a given moment in time, is largely irrelevant for whether you're losing fat over time from your body, because the body shifts fuel substrates over time. If you burn more glycogen right now, then you might not burn as much fat, but then later you have to burn, or you have to rebuild the glycogen, so you're probably going to burn more fat at that moment. It all evens out in the end and comes down to total energy balance.
What about metabolic adaptation?
Metabolic adaptation is very real. Many people, or a common myth is that there's metabolic damage. And the difference is that damage would be permanent and metabolic adaptation is temporary, or at least it reverses when you go back, when you change your body composition. And research supports that people are at a very highly adaptive metabolism. So if you lose a lot of weight, you're going to have a lower energy expenditure, not just because your weight is lower and you're carrying around less weight that you also have to move around, which also costs energy, but there's also a reduction beyond that, which is called adaptive thermogenesis. So it's a reality that the leaner you get, the lower your energy expenditure. There's not much you can do about that other than building muscle and being active and having a good diet. But there's no such thing as damage. So it's not like your metabolism is broken or something, and then you try to, afterwards, you can no longer lose fat, or you start a yo-yo diet because now your metabolism is broken. There's no truth to that.
So when we think about chronic dieters that have been in a really, really long deficit for probably perhaps years, and they are used to eating 12, 1400 calories, and they are quote unquote maintaining potentially their weight around that intake. But the when you calculate their TDEE, or the ideal scenario for someone at their age with their activity and their body composition, it should be much higher than that. What do we need to do in order to take this person at this low energy expenditure, BMR, and TDEE to really get them to that actual estimated or ideal energy expenditure?
But it may not be possible. Some people just have a lower metabolism than other people. There's quite significant variance, not as large as people think, but it's substantial. And the main things you can do for your metabolism are the same things as any body fat percentage, basically. You can either do more exercise, you can improve your diet, which increases the thermic effect of food, but primarily simply reduces energy intake. And then you generally expend more energy from increasing your step count or being more active in any other way.
Okay. I would say, like, thinking if someone has been adapted so long to that lower energy intake, what are your thoughts about putting some strategies beyond that? Like when we think about trying to increase their energy intake over a period of time, do you believe in that application for like reverse dieting in these particular situations, or what are your thoughts?
So we researched this in one of my early papers, and we found that the only way you can kind of get back your metabolism would be to just regain the fat, which of course is not desirable. So even in bodybuilders, women with anorexia, malnourished individuals, wrestlers that do weight cycling, we see that there's no benefit to having like slow phase or a maintenance phase or anything to rebuild your metabolism, because it isn't broken. Like there's nothing to fix. It might be suppressed, but that's natural. So it's the same mechanisms that prevent or that reduce your metabolism as you get leaner. It's those exact same mechanisms that also make it harder to gain fat. So this is just how the body works. There's nothing to fix, and there's no need for diet breaks, maintenance phases, anything like that. You can do it for just compliance reasons, or just prefer to do them. But it's not necessary to fix something that just isn't broken.
Agree. Now, refit days. What are your thoughts about this one?
Very similar. Most research finds that the leptin, which is usually purported to be like the mechanism for where you can kind of cheat your metabolism or trick it or hack it, leptin responds to cumulative total energy balance over time and total body fat stores. So the mechanism is essentially uncheatable. It's the only way to increase your leptin levels is to consume more energy. And yeah, then the only thing you get from that is, of course, if you really want to have a massive spike in energy expenditure, you just have to overeat a lot, but then you gain fat. So it's not really desirable. So you can't really cheat your metabolism in any way. The only scenario in which I see refeeds being useful is if someone is dieting too aggressively in the first place. And then it's not specifically that you need a refeed. It's just that your total energy deficit is too large. Because we know that the energy deficit is very important. If it's too large, then you risk muscle loss, you slow your metabolism more than needed. So you can kind of quick fix that in some scenarios by having a refeed, because it changes the net energy balance over time very significantly.
I am thinking one question that probably is coming potentially from part of the book you've written, but also a lot of the mindset that you work around. And what is the number one behavior change that separates people who transform their physiques from those who spin their wheels all the time?
In research, you often see that consistency ranks extremely high. Consistency has a number of benefits, and I think it's often downplayed in the current kind of if it fits your macros type culture, because it's like you can eat whatever you want. And yes, theoretically, it's true. You can eat whenever you want, also largely true. But consistency, behaviorally speaking, makes a huge difference. So if you look at the people that are like long-term able to maintain six-pack as guys, or like almost close to it as women, 20% body fat or something, you see something very substantial that's different from between these groups. The people that don't achieve this long term, the people that do it are very consistent. They have their routines, they have their habits, they found out what works for them, and they do that very consistently over long periods of time. And yes, they have holidays and they have eating events and all that stuff, but by and large, their total lifestyle is very consistent and sustainable. And people that don't have this, think of a diet as an 8-week period of suffering to get abs for the summer or fit in my wedding dress. Those people often don't have that consistency. They don't achieve sustainable lifestyle change, what is necessary to be lean, not just tomorrow, next week, next month, but 10 years from now.
I agree. I think consistency is so important. I don't think people value it as much as it should be, just because it's you hear it all the time, but it's just because it's so mundane and so basic. But at the same time, it's one of the things that just seems to be so strongly correlated to success. And I couldn't agree more with you in that one. Now, there's one.
It's true.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, I want to ask you something in terms of training. Like, you are very critical when it comes to talking about junk volume and like actually getting adequate amount of training intensity and good stimuli. But what for you, what is the minimum training dose that you will require to actually have decent gains?
Decent is a little bit subjective, but the necessary training dose to get any response, so basically the minimum effective training volume, is very low. It's surprisingly low. If you train very hard, you truly take your sets to failure, or at least doing as many reps as you can, and you can, with just one set per week, make gains for quite some time as a novice to early intermediate. And then as you get into the like seriously trained individual type range, we see that people can still make gains if they train very hard with as little as or as few as 4 sets per week per muscle group. Even in powerlifters, it's around that level of 4 sets that we see that they need to do that to make progress, but it's very, very low. Now, of course, when you double that volume, you get substantially faster muscle growth and strength development, especially muscle growth, but it's not necessary. So this is definitely one of those things where people want things fast, they want results fast, and I totally understand that. But there is definitely something to be said for going with a very low volume approach, as long as you have that lifestyle consistency, so that you're sure that you are making gains, and every year you do look a little bit better. You can sustain that for very long periods with relatively minimal effort.
Thinking about actual number of sets per week per muscle group, where do you stand in this?
So when you go beyond that minimum of like 1 to 4 sets, depending on training advancements, you see that even untrained individuals typically benefit from going over 10 sets, or at least getting about 10 sets per week per muscle group. You get substantially more muscle growth. And for trained individuals in particular, we see the benefits going up to the 20, 30, based on the latest meta-analysis, even 45 plus. But then you get very sharply diminishing returns, and the risk increases dramatically. So injury risk for someone doing 5 sets per week per muscle group is very low. Injury risk for someone doing 50 sets per week per muscle group is very high. The training effort is way higher. You're going to spend much more time in the gym. And the incremental progress from like 20 to 50 sets per week it's quite large, despite being more than a doubling of training volume. So it's very important to look at someone's recovery capacity and see where someone falls along that continuum, and then basically calculating the cost benefit or the risk reward to see what's like an appropriate training volume for this individual.
When you think about the accounting for the volume and calculating the number of sets per week, how do you account for the volume that comes from perhaps compound movements or movements that involve or target more than one muscle group? Let's say if I'm doing the squats, I'm probably training my glutes, but I'm also training my quads. So how do you account, or how many sets do you allocate to that particular set for that muscle group? Does that make sense?
Yes. So I've long advocated for fractional volume counting, which is now the term that's in fallen mostly in favor in exercise science. So most people just assume that an exercise either trains the muscle or it doesn't, or one exercise trains one muscle group. But in reality, many exercises train multiple muscle groups, but perhaps not 100%. So for example, we know that dumbbell rows train the biceps, but only about half as well as a biceps isolation exercise. So it makes sense to allocate half volume to the biceps for that exercise. So this can get complicated, which is why I now have an app which literally does this, where it puzzles together like all the volumes, where every exercise has like, this is 50% volume for biceps, this is 25% volume for traps, and then you just add up everything together to get that your ideal, say, 14 sets per week per muscle group. That's ideally how you want to do it, but it's quite complicated. So for most individuals, I recommend either counting exercises fully or half. But beyond that, you have to see basically like what is your level of expertise, and does it really make sense to go into details of like, is this 60% or 70% volume for the traps?
Yeah, and I guess it is valuable for someone who perhaps is increasing their training frequency and training volume compared to someone that is training perhaps just like the minimum effective volume for a number of sets per week. Perhaps it's not that relevant as compared to someone who is trying to increase the training volume and the training sets frequency. Then you probably want to be smart about how you allocate the number of sets and the different exercises and the exercise allocation and distribution throughout the week. So if we have a person who only has the capacity to train 2 times a week, what would be your main strategies or the blueprint that you will give this person to get exact amazing gains just by training 2 times a week?
You can get very far training 2 times a week. I would almost recommend full body workouts in this case, so that you train every muscle group also at least twice per week. And beyond that, most of the strategies should revolve around getting in as much volume as possible. So you don't actually need necessarily a very rigid type of program. You can make that, but many of the approaches will center more around getting in as much training stimulus as you can. So you don't have to worry about stimulus to fatigue ratio and all those types of things, because you're not going to exceed your recovery capacity. It's very, very unlikely 2 days a week. So you can do things like drop sets, use advanced techniques, rest pause, myo reps, lengthened partials, extended lengthened partials after you orient failure, those types of things, especially your last set of every muscle group. It makes a lot of sense to use the time you have as effectively as possible and just maximize the training stress. So that's very different how you set up their program versus someone that's doing 45 sets per week per muscle group, because they have to really pay attention to stimulus to fatigue ratio. And as you said, they also have to pay attention that the volume is actually calculated well, because if you think it's 45, but in reality you didn't count all the other exercises, and then you have, for example, the front delts that are at 80 sets, that's a recipe for shoulder injury. So basically train 2 times a week and focus on just really banging out as much volume as you can, short rest intervals, circuit training, probably your combo sets, minimal rest times, and taking your sets very close to failure or to failure, and then doing some post-failure training probably on the last set of most muscle groups.
I have a follow-up question. So you mentioned a couple of times training intensity and getting closer to failure. Maybe a lot of people don't even know what failure means or what actually feels like. So when you talk about training with intention, with intensity, with intent, with effort, getting close to failure, what does that even feel like? What does that even mean? Or what does that look like?
So the easiest definition is momentary muscle failure, which is simply the physical inability to complete another repetition. Now, what many people don't realize is that they say, I went to failure, and then you ask them, okay, which rep did you fail? They're like, oh, well, I didn't actually fail the last rep, but I couldn't do another one. Like, if you didn't actually literally fail a repetition, you did not hit momentary muscle failure. Momentary muscle failure literally means that you needed the safety bars, or you need to duck in the squat. You needed your spotter doing the bench press because the bar wouldn't go up anymore despite you trying. That's true momentary muscle failure. So that's the easiest benchmark. And I think it's very important to train to failure sometimes to know that you're actually close to that. Because one of the most revealing findings of exercise science for me is that a meta-analysis that looked at the average gym goer, how hard they train. And a lot of people are 7 to 10 reps away from true momentary muscle failure. And if you're 10 reps away from failure in your workouts, your entire workout by like bodybuilding standards is a warm-up. So any discussion of stimulus to fatigue ratio or protein timing, all that stuff becomes completely irrelevant to just compared to just saying, okay, you need to train as hard as you can. Don't worry so much about, injuries and perfect technique and all these things. The primary thing here is just to train with more effort and know that you, with an empowering approach, that you can do more. Like you have more in you than you probably think, or you have, your safety mechanisms on that don't need to be. So yeah, that's the easiest way to learn it.
I do have something that seems to be very common, and a lot of people confuse getting very close to failure or getting to failure with like just that burning sensation in your muscles. Like you feel like you've accumulated a little bit of that lactic acid, or like you just feel like you're working the muscle and it feels like you're feeling something intense in the muscle, but you don't really know, is that failure or it's just like I just getting closer, but it's not enough? Or how do you determine or differentiate having a built-in lactic acid momentaneously or metabolites versus actually identifying that you've reached failure?
In general, one of the most consistent findings in psychology and economics is that people put excessive faith in subjective feelings over objective markers. And that's very much true in exercise science as well, where people they think too much about muscle soreness, the pump, the burn, how things feel, mental fatigue, like whether they are exhausted, whether they're motivated. And these things can definitely be important. But very often when you want to objectively optimize it as a system or a training program, it's best to pay attention primarily to objective criteria, like can you actually do another repetition? And that also can be very freeing for individuals where it's like, yeah, your muscles are burning, it's fine, just keep going. If the weight is still going up, keep going. You're good, you're fine. So when you go with that approach, you immediately shift the emphasis to thinking about completely other things. So not like, oh, my muscles are burning, is that okay? Or when you think about it less, you also feed it less and you're worried about it less. So focusing on these objective markers, also with training volume, like are your reps going up? Are they going down across sets? For example, if they're not going down across sets, but they're actually going up, then you're not getting fatigued, right? Objectively, your reps should be going down or it should stay the same at most. So that really helps a lot with quantifying these things like effort much more accurately than subjective indicators. And there's also research on this where originally people used the Borg scale and rating of perceived exertion, where they basically just ask people like, how intense do you think this exercise is? And then now we know that it's much more accurate to simply ask people directly, how many more repetitions do you think you could have still have done? When you just objectively think of the repetition gap between reaching failure, people are much more accurate than when you think of like, oh, this is like kind of an 8 out of 10 in terms of effort, I guess.
There's another thing that seems to be a very common mistake, or maybe a lot of questions around how do I even determine what a RIR or rep in reserve I have? How many reps in reserve do I have? Like, what is the best strategy or best method to actually get to that number?
So people in general are reasonably accurate at that if you are looking at highly motivated, well-trained individuals. Interestingly, training experience does not make people much better at estimating the reps in reserve. So there seems to be a very strong motivational individual component. For some people, you as a coach, there's some people you have to just pull on the reins because they will go to failure if you don't actively tell them like don't go to failure. They will go to failure and possibly beyond. So they might even go into rest pause sets. There's just no break. And then other individuals, you have to really motivate them and say like, okay, you can train harder and be very empowering because they don't naturally do that. And that also seems to be the case with reps in reserve, reps to failure. Some people just accurately estimate that and they train closer to failure usually. And some people train much further away from failure and you're also less accurate because the further away from failure you are, the less accurate people tend to be. And for those reasons, typically, especially if someone is not highly motivated, I recommend that people just do as many reps as they can because when people are already struggling with training very hard, the last thing you want is to also worry about like how many reps in reserve am I doing? So for a lot of individuals, I actually prefer to just tell them do as many reps as you can. Don't worry about reps in reserve and all that stuff. Do as many as you can. And occasionally probably just keep pushing when you think you can't push anymore. And then you might hit failure sometimes because then if you were actually pushing as hard as you thought before. And many people then realize you can actually push harder than you thought.
So when it comes to training design, are you suggesting that it would be better to not give them a rep range, but rather just go as as hard as you can and the best you can, and from maybe the first 2 weeks of data, we can actually have a bit of an idea of what is your closer to failure means for each exercise? Or do you suggest at least giving them a bit of an idea when it comes to how much should I choose when it comes to load? Because that is another thing, especially for someone who is not experienced or hasn't been lifting for years. How do you determine or give them the best direction when it comes to a training program design to get them, okay, how many reps, what load should I choose?
Yes. So I typically give them either a rep target to start with, or more commonly, I give them a weight, which is based on estimated 1RM or their previous results, if they have them. And then they just do as many reps as they can with that load. And that becomes the rep target afterwards. And after that, you're going to try to beat that rep target every time. So research also finds that a progressive overload this way is not only crucial for long-term progress, but it's also highly motivational. So if you tell people last time you did 8, So today we're going to hit 9 or more. And I don't tell them hit 10. I just say 9 or more. Do as many as you can. If you can hit 10, if you can hit 12, if you can hit 20, amazing. Most likely because last time you hit 8, you're going to hit 9 or something. And then you ensure that people will consistently train hard. Even if they weren't training that hard to begin with, this forces them over time to start training very hard. Otherwise, you won't be able to beat their last rep targets or the last weight.
What is your favorite way to add or to progressive overload? Is it adding more sets? Is it adding more reps or more load? What is your favorite?
Loads when possible, but in practice, often reps, because you can't just add load to every exercise, especially for women. If you're doing lateral raises and the weight goes from 5 pounds to 10 pounds, that's a 100% increase in weight. So that's going to take a lot of time to make that jump. So then you increase the reps. But load is amazing in that it's undeniable. Like if your bench press is 20 pounds higher, you're just stronger. Like there's no way to fake that. It's objective progress. Repetitions are also very good. Research finds that load and repetitions tend to be equally effective. But when you move to other measures, things become a lot murkier. For example, adding sets is not really progressive overload. Adding sets is a way to increase the training stress, but you can be not progressing and add sets and still be not progressing. And then you add more sets, so you're still not progressing because originally you were already training too hard, you were not recovering. So you can add sets all you want, but it's only making things worse. And it's not achieving the desired goal of progressive overload, which is actually progressing over time. So for adding sets, I think should be viewed mostly independently of actual progressive overload. Actual progressive overload in the original sense of the word in exercise science was designed to keep the training program at a certain level of training stress, because as you get stronger, you can also handle higher training loads or repetitions, and you need to, otherwise you're not training as hard anymore. So it's progressive overload is a signal that A, you are progressing, it's a measure of progress, and B, it's make sure that your relative training intensity in terms of effort stays the same, because you keep pushing yourself harder and harder as you're getting stronger and stronger.
I agree. Totally agree with that. Now, can lean tissue be built on maintenance or a surplus is needed always?
Yeah, you can definitely build muscle even in energy deficit. It's easier when you're in energy surplus, but the difference is not nearly as large as most people think. In many studies, the differences are not statistically significant. We have a meta-analysis showing that it's like a 500 calorie deficit before you really see a significant difference in muscle growth, and it becomes very difficult for most individuals to build any muscle. But many people have this idea that, in energy deficit you can build muscle, and energy surplus it's very easy. No, it's a small difference. I also see that in most of my clients, their strength progress is not actually that different when they're cutting versus when they're bulking. It's like a little bit more consistent when they're bulking, especially long term, but it's still great when cutting generally. So there is an effect, but not nearly as much as people believe.
So, would you say that lean bulk is officially the best word to talk about gaining or gaining some muscle, main gaining? What is your best approach when it comes to thinking about these terms, these coin terms about lean bulk, main gaining? Where are you standing with this?
Yeah, I'm in that sense, I'm old school. I like the bodybuilding terms, cutting and lean bulking, main gaining and stuff. For one, if if you're focused on muscle growth, a lean bulk, if you do it well, is not going to put on a lot of fat. Ideally none, but in practice, there's always some fat gain. And it should be a significant difference because the body actually has that energy surplus, which is a driving factor in itself to build new tissue. So you just get better gains when you lean bulk versus when you try to main gain or maintain or whatever. So that's why I like lean bulking generally. Plus, at maintenance, tracking becomes a nightmare. Usually what you see when people are at maintenance, and this is something that I think very few people talk about, caliper measurements, waist circumference measurements, weight measurements, they fluctuate much more when someone is around maintenance than when someone is cutting or bulking. Because when you're around maintenance, your body dips into energy deficit and into energy surplus all the time. So it's not like you're all the time exactly at equilibrium. What happens is that you're kind of hovering around this level, and then you see a wide variation in your measurements, which can even seem sometimes like 2 weeks in a row you're kind of gaining fat, it seems like, and then it goes back down. So you're just reading a lot of noise. And that noise in my experience, very strongly seems to be much higher at maintenance. And I think it's because you're dipping in and out of energy deficit and surplus.
And that is if someone is thinking that they're at maintenance because they're not necessarily tracking, or if you're thinking about someone like if someone is at maintenance but they are actually tracking and they have relatively a very tight range that they're aiming for, do you still see these big fluctuations, or it's more when you have someone that is not tracking?
Yeah, when they're not tracking, it's way worse. But even when they're tracking, for one, everyone makes tracking errors. And, even the energy intake we think we consume, it varies per foods. Labels can be off by like 20%. And even when you're tracking your energy intake all the time, your energy expenditure can significantly vary from day to day. So you're always going to have differences in your daily energy balance. It's just physically impossible, basically, to be exactly at energy maintenance every single day.
That's true. Now, let's move to these true and false rapid questions. I basically will make a statement. You say whether for you is true or false, and maybe you can explain your take. Okay. So the first one is a high protein diet always keeps you fuller. True or false?
False. That's what we discussed at the beginning. It's true when you're not consuming enough protein yet, and when you're comparing certain types of protein sources versus certain types of other foods, it's not universally true.
You can't build muscle in a deficit. True or false?
False.
Okay. 3 sets per exercise is enough if intensity is high.
It can be enough in the sense of being above the minimum effective training volume. Yes.
Okay. Metabolic adaptation ruins most diets. True or false?
False. It's much less important than many people fear.
Yep. Training to failure is necessary for hypertrophy. True or false?
False. Definitely not. Your total training volume is what matters. Training closer to failure makes every set more effective on a set by set basis, but in the end, it's the total volume that matters.
When you mention volume, do you refer as well as the training intensity? Because you can have you mentioned as well that you can have a lot of training volume, but you're not really doing that with enough intensity or getting closer to failure. So maybe you don't need to train fully to failure, but closer to potentially is where you want to stick around.
Yes, the less close to failure you train, the more sets you have to do. And if you're training very far away from failure, it just becomes impossible. You even with a crazy volume, at some point you cannot compensate for just not training hard at all.
Okay. Probiotics improve body composition. True or false?
Mostly false, I would say. There is some evidence in support of this. I'm very skeptical of the benefits in like a healthy individual that already has a decent diet. We mostly see this in obese individuals that have a really poor diet. And then there's also supplement bias and stuff in the study. So I'm not convinced that there's much there.
Okay. The body fat set point theory is very real. True or false?
False. There is a set link point or an equilibrium point. But this idea that your body just wants you to be 25% body fat and there's nothing you can do about it, that's completely false.
Okay. Genetics beat programming every time.
Definitely not every time. No, false. Genetics are very real, but everyone can gain muscle, everyone can gain fat pretty much. And especially everybody can lose fat, everybody can get stronger. So there's always room for growth.
If you're not sore, your workout wasn't effective.
Definitely false. Many people, especially more trained individuals doing habitual workouts, they never get sore anymore or minimally, and they can still have great workouts with great results.
Meal timing is irrelevant if your calories and protein are in check.
False. It's less important than total intakes in most scenarios, but it's not like we can have one meal per month, for example, and your gains are going to be the same, right? So nutrient timing matters. It's just the extent of which depends on the exact scenario.
So when you mention a scenario, is it different or is it more important meal timing for someone who is in, let's say, trying to put on muscle versus someone who is trying to lose weight? Is there much of a difference when it comes to this importance?
There is some research on this. It's mostly based on nitrogen balance. I think for muscle growth, it's more important. For example, if you imagine someone training at forcefully in the morning and then they only start eating late in the day, that's most likely suboptimal. So then it might even make a bigger difference, the timing, than say 200 calorie difference.
Okay. The fitness industry thrives on confusion. True or false?
Sure. All media thrive on confusion and have negativity bias.
All right, let's move to overrated, underrated. So I say it straight. Is it overrated, underrated, and why? Now, lean bulking, overrated or underrated?
Perfect.
Okay. Training volume, overrated or underrated?
Underrated. It's one of the most important things in the training program.
Carb backloading.
Overrated. I think it's not that popular anymore, but there's just not much there. But it might have a small beneficial effect, but research is very, very iffy on that.
What about carb cycling?
Overrated. Carb backloading at least has like some purpose. If you're just randomly cycling for the sake of it, it really doesn't do anything other than complicate your diet.
Probiotic supplements and prebiotics.
All supplements for me go in the overrated category, even if they are effective.
Okay. Is there any particular supplement that you believe is underrated?
Maybe something like fish oil or vitamin D. It would probably be a mineral supplement or like vitamin D. Creatine, maybe, but creatine is also very, very popular. And many people stop using it because they don't get as much out of it as they thought. So I'm guessing something like omega-3s or something, because it has a wide range of benefits that actually does something. And a lot of people don't take it anymore, I find, these days.
Do you consider zinc and magnesium, some of those perhaps underrated?
Yeah, they have quite tangible benefits, like for sleep quality, libido, skin quality, hair quality. So, and they're hard to get from a diet these days. So zinc and magnesium quite often end up in my clients' supplement stacks.
What about protein powders? Do you believe this is a one that is properly rated or is overrated, underrated?
Overrated because people use them a lot and it's helping them get more protein. So it's nice at first, but it's also preventing sustainable lifestyle change in terms of actually eating better foods, which in the end for most people is more important.
I agree with that. Periodized nutrition, overrated or underrated?
Overrated. That's a lot of complexity and doesn't do that much.
Progressive overload.
Underrated. Absolutely vital for long-term progress.
Blood sugar tracking.
Super overrated. For most individuals, it really doesn't change anything. It's one of those things. People love tracking stuff. They love data, but then you always have to ask if you're tracking this and it's high or it's low, does it actually change what you do? Because if the answer is no, then you can just stop tracking it.
Sleep trackers.
So say they are not actually better than just objectively assessing your sleep quality in much research. So overrated.
I do believe like it actually makes potentially could make things worse because you over stress about what the data is saying, and sometimes that can impact the actual implementation of strategies to actually sleep better.
Yes, and it's like one of those things where you get massive nocebo effect too. So you wake up, you're like, time to start the day. Your Oura Rings tells you you slept like crap, and like, damn, it's gonna be a horrible day.
I agree with that. Okay, high frequency training, overrated or underrated?
Underrated. Most research finds that higher training frequencies improve or have neutral results. Volume is more important, but if anything, frequency is positive or neutral, and there's essentially no research to speak of for downsides. So underrated in that sense.
What is your favorite training frequency?
Full body workouts for most individuals. So meaning they train every muscle group. Well, most of the times they train, like multiple times per week for sure.
What is perhaps the minimum number of days when you think about high frequency?
I guess high would be 3 or more times, and I would almost never recommend someone interested in maximizing muscle hypertrophy to train a muscle fewer than 2 times per week. 2 times is really the minimum I would recommend for almost anyone.
And if you're doing full body workouts, would you say in high frequency, six, like 6 days, 7 days a week, is that possible or is that too much?
Yeah, very possible. I train full body every single day. Many of my high level do it.
When it comes to rest days, are they overrated or underrated?
Overrated in that you don't need a rest day. You just need to manage your total training stress. Like it's not like your body has this called like Gregorian calendar bias, or we tend to think of like days and weeks and stuff, but the body doesn't really operate like that. There's just a continuous flow over time in which regeneration takes place, and whether that coincides with the passing of a lunar cycle, that's not actually that relevant physiologically speaking.
So in this case, are you more like, do you prefer more like these active rest days where you actually move your body, do something else, and rather than just staying in bed resting all day?
Yeah, you could do that, or Like if you don't have training plans, you got all your training in for the week, have your rest days, great. Most people don't need to train every day, for sure. But if you do want to spread out your training volume, I like having short workouts, for example. So my workouts, I train every day, but I'm usually out of the gym in half an hour. So I prefer them over longer workouts.
What about auto regulation? Is that under or overrated?
Underrated. Quite effective and also improves motivation, preferences. It's like no downsides, just positives.
Okay. Cold exposure for fat loss.
Very overrated these days. Really doesn't do that much. Can increase energy expenditure a little bit, but then often also increases appetite. And it's really small differences.
Infrared sauna.
I used to say very overrated, but the research is not that weak anymore. So like sauna in general might actually be something there. So maybe underrated.
Okay. Interesting. What about your PT course? Underrated or overrated?
Words. I made it, so been working on it for over 10 years. So of course I like it. I think it's very good. Even I learn something new sometimes when I look at it.
That's all. Now let's move to filling the blank. Fast and fun. Okay. The most overhyped fitness trend right now is blank.
Lots of glucose structure.
Okay. The one supplement I actually recommend is, so what is your actual vitamin?
Beef.
Okay. If your training isn't working, you probably need more blank. Okay. The most misunderstood study in fitness is blank.
So understood what? Sorry.
The most misunderstood study in fitness is
So many. But there's one on incline versus flat bench pressing that I discussed on my YouTube last week. I think that one is super misunderstood because I don't trust the results at all.
any other?
There's so many. Like there are a lot of studies on like low carb versus high carb, where it's just confounded by protein intake or energy intake. So that's a really common one. Many supplements that have like funding issues, and turns out if you look at the research, the funded industry funded research is all positive, and the rest of the research is all negative. It's like, there's one very famous one, at least in like evidence-based fitness, on the overhead triceps extensions, also taken completely out of context, and it's a really bad study. So yeah, lots and lots of them.
Okay. The best predictor of long term success when it comes to really good results and you're achieving your best physique is
Just
physique transformations are 90% blank and 10% blank.
9%. What 9% then?
90% and 10%.
Okay, so let's say 10% optimization, 90% consistency.
Okay. The worst advice I keep saying on Instagram is blank.
Carnivore diets right now are pretty high up there, I would say. Not advisable for many individuals and very popular.
Okay. If you could ban one gym myth or fitness myth forever, it would be blank.
High versus low carbs, I guess. It really doesn't matter for most intents and purposes.
But gym myth, training myth.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, the pump and soreness. So soreness indicates a good workout, or the pump indicates a good workout.
Okay. When in doubt, just blank.
Think of long-term sustainable lifestyles.
Okay. Last one. Science doesn't care about your blank.
Feelings.
Yeah. Awesome. Now, I think it was really, really good to go over all these questions. I picked up certain questions that I sort of like included them from the audience into these questions as well. Is anything coming for you over the next couple of months? Future planning.
Yeah, my app is rolling out now. It's in beta phase, so you'll hear more about that soon. PT course is still going strong, more happier than ever. So I'm still working on that. Making the education better than ever for people interested in like really learning all the details in evidence-based fitness about nutrition, training, muscle hypertrophy, and especially physique optimization. Other than that, still working on a couple studies. I can't post too much about those yet, but those should also be very interesting. So I'll share those for sure.
Talk to us a bit more about your app and your course.
So my app is for people that are generally pretty serious lifters. They go to a gym and they're interested in maximizing their gains for a fraction of the cost that it would be to get a coach. Of course, coach is always better, but you know, you can't get a coach for $20 a month, and it's, I think, really good. We're working on the UI, making the user experience better, because it's very hard to make an app, but it does the training programming well. It creates good training programs, good nutrition programs, optimizes your macros, changes the program over time based on your results, even gives you a full meal plan. Like it actually configures all the foods with not just like, half an apple, 3 almonds, half a protein shake, no, actual recipes. So I think it will do really well. And I'm super excited about that one.
Your course, is it something that's, yeah, I was gonna ask if is it something that you can do, is it, it's got like different modules that you can do at any time at your own pace, or how does it work?
Yeah, you can largely follow it at your own pace. All the lectures are recorded, so you can view them after. You get all the PDFs, you can download everything. And there is an exam, and we have it set at a certain pace. Like we've been doing this for 10 years. We have extensive research on what is like the best pace, what is the best order of do all the modules, the best learning experience. And I'm there to answer all your questions myself. So we highly recommend that you follow the course at the set order, because people get the best learning experience from that, whether they're a personal trainer or just a serious lifter. But you can do it at your own pace, and you can postpone the exam as well. So there's one exam day per course, but you can just go to the next course. If you don't want to do the exam, you take it with the next group, and you can do that indefinitely.
What is the name of your app? I didn't ask.
It's called Physique app.
Is it already live or just still under?
If you search for it, you can find it. Yeah. If you search for it, you can already find it, but we're not actively promoting it really yet, because we're already working on a lot of things. So basically, we do a little bit of promotion every time we need to do user feedback, and then we optimize everything for the user feedback, and we do another like little push. But it's already out there and working, and you can register if you can actually find if you Google it.
Perfect. That's awesome. So this is going to go to YouTube very soon as well. And I'm really, really excited to show everyone this, and I'm also will leave this video live for everyone to see it on our feeds. It was awesome to see you. That I hope to talk to you very soon, and all the best with all these great things that you're doing.
You too. All right.
Bye.